do a normal introduction, but I'm terrible at those. So I'm just going to say that Bill Wetzel, who's going to come and read and talk to you guys in just a second, is a fantastic, rich, and very, very funny, among other things, writer who lives in Tucson, is not from Tucson, but lives in Tucson, and who knows more about the world than I can ever possibly articulate. So I'm going to turn it over to him and let him read for you guys.
All right.
Bill Wetzel.
Thank you, Lisa, and thank you all for coming. I really have never done anything like this before. I've like given like small lectures, and then I've read quite a bit, but this is my first time too. And I'm usually not funny before noon, so I'll kind of taper off on like any corny jokes that I have. If you want to see my humor, check out my Twitter. That's where I usually do stuff on there. And that's kind of like the 6-word thing that you had you do. I learned a lot actually from just writing little short 140 character sort of things. And it's kind of telling because like my most like favorited tweet ever is like just, it's idiotic. It's like, I say potato and you say it like a douche. But it's like it has like a resonance that is really simple and it's direct and people like that. And like I also like have one that's I say something like I have a lot in common with the late great Nelson Mandela, mostly that we've both been to jail before. And it's just like little things like that. For some reason they resonate with people, and you can learn a lot from practicing your cadence just by doing a 6-word story, or like doing like tweets like that. A lot of people, now you'll see some people, they'll start writing novels and everything on Twitter, so I'm kind of fascinated with that medium. I'm going to start with kind of an odd little statement. It's just a premise on how I look at language. I want you to think about the premise that language is like a religion, not an organized religion, but it's like more like language is sacred and it should be treated as such. If you look in the Bible, and this also comes from A House Made of Dawn, which is N. Scott Momaday, a book that he won a Pulitzer for. He has a character that uses this quote quite a bit. It's from John 1:1, the Word became flesh. In the beginning there was Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. If you listen to that, it says in the beginning there was Word. So like in the beginning there was language. Now, if you look at, in the Bible they're talking about the Word became flesh. What they mean is Jesus, a God, became man. So he became flesh. But if you look at the more literal sense of it, it's talking about how in the beginning there was language, and the language and God were synonymous with each other. And the Word was God. So that's to suggest that language and God, they're indivisible, that they're one and the same. So if you think of it along those lines, you can kind of discover and look at language as something that is sacred and should be used in a certain way. Language in its purest form, it should be honest, whether it's used in daily communication, politics, law, or in the case of a writer, art. And this, of course, isn't always the case. Many people use language to lie and to manipulate on a daily basis. These people are who they are. You can't change that, but what we can all do is hold ourselves to a higher standard. We can all use language with honesty and integrity. And there's no one way to do this. We each have our own ways to stay true to ourselves. But what we all can do is just let our words speak for ourselves. Let it speak for you. Let them be substantive and show that you are a person of integrity. Treat language as if it is sacred. That's not only a great starting point as a writer, but also as a person. I'll also talk a little bit now about how I got into writing, then I'll give you my prose philosophy. First of all, I am the curator and founder of Shukshan, an indigenous reading series at Casa Libre en La Solana on 4th Avenue. And we are having an event this Friday, the 26th. I'm bringing in some people from, it's called Off the Path. It's an anthology of Native American writers in Montana. They're going to be reading at 7 o'clock there. If you want any more information, just look up casalibre.org on their website, or I'll send Lisa the information too. I am also a board member of the Tucson Poetry Festival, and throughout the year we're going to have regular events, just off and on, I guess. We had a couple last week. I read with Richard Seiken and also a screenwriter named Ken White. And then we also, Ken White did a screenwriting seminar at Pima downtown. And we're going to try to do some more things like that throughout the year. But our main festival is in April, and it's all free. We're going to bring in some big name writers. We're going to have free workshops and everything that you probably couldn't get anywhere else. We have people that actually don't do workshops typically, and this is the only time you get to get in and for free to see one, let alone anything else. Some of them don't even teach, so it's the only time you'll ever get to do a workshop with them. You can look up just Google Tucson Poetry Festival or look at TucsonPoetryFestival.org. And if you want to get involved or volunteer or anything, you can just contact me. I'll give all my information to Lisa. Basically, the whole reason I got into writing centers around a concept called kitchen table theory. And it's kind of summed up by the great Muskogee Indian writer Joy Harjo. She says life begins at a kitchen table. Basically, I'm a hick from a small reservation in Montana. I grew up on a farm and ranch. I used to ride bulls, I rodeoed, and I wrestled and fought everything you could on a farm. And basically, that's how I grew up. And my hometown has like 3,000 people in it. It's just tiny. And I actually was even more of a countrified person because I lived 6 miles out just right in the sticks. And our newspapers around there, they only come out like once a week. So how you learn the news and how you get gossip and everything is people will come in and out of your house. And I was always introduced to a variety of characters coming in and out of our house, sitting at a kitchen table, drinking coffee, eating food, and telling funny stories or just any kind of stories at all. My grandfather in particular, his name was Bill Wetzel. He was our Blackfeet tribal chairman. He was also the president of the National Congress of American Indians. And he led a really fascinating life. He knew all kinds of famous people. He worked with the President of the United States. He knew JFK personally. And he'd sit down and he'd tell me all these crazy stories and about all these people that he knew, and I was just regaled by them. And one story he told me also when he was a kid, he was 12 years old, he got sent off to boarding school in Haskell in Kansas. And he was just a little kid. And he and his friends, they decided to run away. And he jumped on a train and rode all the way from Kansas to Montana. And it might have even been in the winter. And it just amazed me that a little kid would do something like that. And he just had all kinds of stories just about life in general and people that he knew. And when he'd tell them, people would gather around him. And I always thought that was so fascinating and interesting. Also, my aunts, particularly on my mom's side, really influenced me. They were all really funny. They have a real like crazy, dirty sense of humor. And it's just almost crass. And they tell stories with punchlines. And in my work, I use a lot of punchlines. I'll write not just on Twitter or anything like that, but I'll write a paragraph and I'll use a single line as a punchline. For example, there's a story my aunts told about a guy in Browning, Montana. He broke into a convenience store and he busted out all the windows and the police showed up. They had their guns drawn. And you think, okay, this guy is dangerous. He had the whole place robbed and everything, and he was going to come out fighting. Well, they go in there, and they find this guy. He's just sitting there on the floor, and he's surrounded by bags of Fritos, by potato chips. All he did was he just ate a bunch of potato chips. And he gets up, and they have their guns drawn and everything, and he just sticks his hands out, and he goes, all right, the Frito Bandito is ready to go. And my aunts punctuate that, and everybody laughs, and it's all funny. And I learned a lot just from them on how to tell a good punchline, not just to a joke or not just at the end of a story, but throughout a story. And kind of along those same lines, the director, Martin Scorsese, talks about in his neighborhood how there was a guy who would travel around to houses all the time. And he'd come by their house, like, I don't know, once a month or every Friday or something. And people would gather around him like a TV set almost. And he would just tell stories. And it was a big event. They'd cook a bunch of food, and they'd all sit around and laugh and listen to this guy. And that's kind of how he got his start into becoming a storyteller as well and a filmmaker. And for me, how this kind of applies to like kitchen table theory and how I became a writer is that I wanted to be that guy, basically. On some level. I just always thought it was interesting to see characters like that, and I knew people like that who were welcome anywhere. They'd be offered food. They were always welcome. You give them coffee, beer, a place to stay, even if they needed a place to stay. There's a great value in being a great entertainer. Everybody loves a great entertainer, and I wanted to do that. And it just eventually came about where I started putting those on paper. My earliest short stories were just me messing around, and I'd write something funny for my friends. Like I had a friend of mine, I'd tease him all the time, and I'd write fake stories about him, like using like a pseudonym for him, and about like adventures we would get into. And I think that's just basically my earliest introduction to storytelling. And like I said, many writers get a start this way. I talked to several of them. My friend Shelley Taylor, who's a poet, she started that way. Her grandmother was a great storyteller. My friend Sherwin Bitsui's a poet. Again, he came from a family of storytellers. And one person in particular that I got to meet in one of her essays really shaped me is Helena Maria Veramontes. And she tells a very similar story to like what I just did, that she was in her home in East LA, and her relatives would come in and out, and she'd lay there at night and listen to them all sit at the table and visit at night. She was too young to sit with the adults that late, but that shaped her. That was her first introduction to telling stories. And I was reading this essay, and I couldn't believe the commonalities that a reservation farm hick from Montana could have so much in common with this Mexican woman from East LA, but we did. And it's just like Scorsese. When I read his biography, then when I heard him tell the story about the guy that came to his house, I couldn't believe that we had so much in common. And that's one place for you all to start, and it ties in with identity too. Because Scorsese comes from a very communal, familial Italian background. Veramontes comes from a very familial, communal Latino background. And I come from both, I guess, a rural background, but an indigenous background. It's all familial, it's all communal. You start with the people you know, the stories that they tell, the things that you know, your culture, your people, the landscape, the lives they live, and then you just, basically from that point on, you expand from it. You start with what you know, and there's something to be said for writing something that you don't know about, but a good starting place is you start with what you know and who you are. Once you get your identity and you embrace your culture, where you come from, the life you've lived and everything, then you can expand it out. It's not one of those things you can really force either. It's the great Brazilian jiu-jitsu practitioner Rickson Gracie says, you don't go with the flow, you flow with the go. And what he means by that is you just let it come. You look around you and you take what you see and you make something out of it. And I'm probably the only person you'll ever hear quote Rickson Gracie and Joy Harjo in the same lecture. And this kind of extends to my prose philosophy and the concept of breaking apart language. I think that there are stories within stories, that a space on a page can be just as important as the words on the page. I believe in condensing words or using one-word sentences, one-word paragraphs. I think that the way a story is structured on a page is important. This probably sets me apart from a lot of prose writers. I think a lot of prose writers look at a page as kind of a canvas, where it's there for them to put their work on. And that's kind of crude because I know painters also use the canvas in certain ways too, but just in general, though, it's something to put your work on. And I think a lot of poets, they look at a page as somewhat like marble, where you're sculpting something into it, that's actually part of the work itself. And that's how I try to look at prose, too. I'll write a regular prose story, and then I look at ways, what am I going to do? Like, where are the pauses? Where are the line breaks? What can I do to make this different and be shaped on a page and sculpted on a page in a different way? And that's kind of, in general, my basic philosophy of that. Is when you break apart language, the further you anatomize it, the more you get out of it. There's more to tell. There's all kinds of different layers to it. And that's sort of why a lot of people think of me as a poet, but I'm really not. I write like one poem like every 7 years or something. It's just, I look at the world slightly differently, and I think that prose writers can't actually use prose as a high art form the way poetry is used. That you can break it apart and you can structure it in certain ways. And with that, I guess I'll read a few things for you. So after all of that, and after I talked about writing prose, I will read my one poem that I wrote in the last 7 years for you. And then you'll be able to see the difference in what I mean in between my prose style and the way I consider poetry. I look at poetry, when I do write it, I base a lot of it on sound. My one every 7 years is I use a lot of sound. And this is called Ghost Flats. It's a variation on themes by James Welch. They shook the green tree down, its spindly bowl forked back golden in crystal's lunar waves. The dirt is dead, further out wind is all the rage, lethal in the dust. We raced a century, skinning together stories, the vital wages of seared sin. No one civic spoke of our good side. Winter jingled meaning into the wind. Scattered bones leave no sign. Famous in my blood, mapped like smoke from narrow wind. Men wept like public saints. Women like lucky numbers in electric flame, jumping against the newfound luck of sky and mortgaged gold. He swung philosophic, implied in exile crumb wind, decorating stunted light, dreaming winter against a world of silent legends. Those songs busy with knives, stars that fell cheap when eyes color a winter blue, starved visions, meaningless tapping, and recollections of mists so simple beneath his bleached, broken shack. No room for a wandering race dying from imitated life. Images clattered, muscling winter red blood like rain in my bones. I'll move on, the renegade astounded as real words create one happy life where battered dreams must end. I'm going to move these out of the way. Because one time I was reading last year, and I was talking, and my hand was like sweating as I was reading, and like I went to like make a point, and like the paper stuck on my hand, and like 100 people started laughing. Now, this is called a collaboration with O, and this is probably a perfect example of what I'm talking about when I say you can write a prose story, or you can write fiction or even nonfiction, actually, like a poem. I like O. He once defined the word unhomed for me over dinner. O's poetry reminds me that language is our identity. That a single word can expand our experience of who we are and where we are from. A single word can tell a whole story, but further. A story can be a letter, a shape, a space, a period, a space inside of a letter. The more we break apart language, the more stories we find. Language and identity are infinite this way. The further we anatomize them, the more definitive they become. I've heard O referred to as that Navajo language poet. I think calling a Dene poet Navajo minimizes their language and therefore their identity. It unhomes them. But yes, you should read O's work. He put all of the white spaces into this story. I usually don't give this up, but the person I'm referring to in that story is Orlando White. And if you get a chance, read his book Bone Light. It's a really amazing book. He's very unique. He's clinical, and he breaks up language way more than I do. I mean, he breaks it up in ways that you don't think of. He looks at the world very uniquely. Like, he may look at, like, say, if you look at the letter O, he might take it and like break it apart in different lines and then make an I and a J or something out of it. And he describes this in his work. It's really fascinating stuff. This is called Two Men of Violence. They are two men of violence living in a volatile world. To them, this is normal. To others outside this world, violence is not normal at all. It is shocking. Violent men cannot grasp normalcy. All they understand is an aberrant existence. Sometimes they commit violence against others. More often than not, they commit violence against each other. They are two men of violence in a volatile world. Soon there will be one. Soon there will be none. This is the grieving woman. In our community, there is a grieving woman. Most of us know the reason why she grieves, although many of us do not understand why she is grieved for so long. We all understand grief. At first we consoled her, but in time we moved on. We still treat her with care and love her. However, many others in our community have had reasons to grieve since. People, communities, the world. We are all constantly grieving. Only so many of us can be consoled at any given time. Once you reach a certain quota of consolation, it comes time for the community to move on, to console someone whose grief is more immediate. So this grieving woman continued to grieve for months and then years. Then one day a man came into our community. This man was fascinated by the grieving woman. To us, she was what she always was, a woman in constant grief. To him, she was different. He wanted to know her. When we asked why, he replied, because she is beautiful in her grief. This is one of my favorite ones I've ever written. It's called Casual Friends, and it's for S. W and E are casual friends. At first sight, E flipped W on W's head. W thinks E is the most beautiful letter in the alphabet. Not just any alphabet, but every alphabet in the history of the world. E, for E's part, is curious about W. E thinks W is an odd letter who knows many odd facts. E likes this as odd letter W makes beautiful E laugh. Together, W and E are we. We is one of the most important words in any language. It means togetherness. Every letter needs another letter to synergistically create something bigger than they each are on their own. We do important work together. We are vital to language. We help create sentences, form thoughts. We are intelligent discussions. We are entertaining stories. However, we are impersonal. We never fully conjugate. We are inextricably linked. But while we help create language, we do not have one of our own. We are we, which is important, but we are not mutually exclusive. We are also one-sided. W is one of the last letters in the alphabet, while E is one of the first. They belong to a different social order. W is simply another consonant at the end of the whole line of consonants. E is elite. E is one of only a few vowels, and one of the most sought after in that group. W can only be paired with a handful of letters. W has little choice. E can be with virtually any letter E wants at any time. W is a relatively insignificant part of E's existence. In so many words, E frequently tells this to W. W is barely worth E's time. W wonders if this is because W is not a vowel. W wishes for a minute W was O. W loves the sound of O rolling off E's gorgeous lips. Or I. W could be I. This would save W much heartbreak, but W has never wanted to be an I. W mostly dreams that we will always simply be we. However, there is a side of W that wishes to be A. W would love to be A. Being A is the easiest way to get E's attention. Sure, W has A-like moments, but W could never fully be A. In truth, E is more A than W will ever be. This hits W hard. In this way, E flips W on W's head again. We are no longer we. W is not the W who E has always known. W is now M, and we is now me. We did not see the world in balance. There was no harmony. As W, M was unstable. M has 3 points grounding it to the floor, while W only had 2. Me is right side up. We was wrong side down. Me is personal. Me is all about itself. M does not need E to lean on and vice versa. M and E are only letters to each other now, separated by many others in the alphabet, unconjugated. M, E. M and E do not work synergistically together. They are the most casual of friends. Whenever I read, I always for some reason, I can think things in my head. So I'm reading, and then on one plane in my head, I'm like, oh God, what is that? Oh no, I should change it. or if it's good, I'm like, damn, I'm good. That line was fucking awesome. This is called Poetess Goddess. I'm a huge fan of Neruda. And I always like quoting his lines. He says these lines that you couldn't get away with now. If you said something like you look like a world lying in surrender, you'd probably get slapped. But he can get away with it. So I like quoting Neruda, and I decided to bookend a story with Neruda quotes. This is very subtly called Poetess Goddess. You look like a world lying in surrender. For her, I would forever quote Neruda, but I would do it in absurd ways so I could enjoy her wonderful laugh. I would watch football and movies with her, barbecue shrimp and conjure homemade mojo sauce. She comes from tradition, but is non-traditional, which means I would do all the work associated with her gender. She would think that I put her on a pedestal, but in reality, I would only be telling her who she is. She is stunning, but doesn't understand what makes her so beautiful. I would live to show her this. At night, I would roughly take her in my arms and whisper in her ear, I want to do with you what spring does with the cherry trees. If any of you have ever watched Fight Club, when Edward Norton is sitting at his computer at work and he's writing these bizarre haikus and stuff and sending them out to people, I often feel like that's what I'm doing when I write really short stories. I'll decide to write a 3-line story and I'm just God, that is just weird. It's and then I'll send it to my friends and I just feel like I'm the weird guy that sends weird haikus to people. And this is kind of one of them that reminds me of that. It's called First Last Date. What is your favorite vowel, she asked. Why, would you like to buy one, he answered. No, she said. I don't play games. I create language. I did have one that I wasn't going to read, but maybe I will. It's a variation on a theme by Stephen Wright. If any of you know who Stephen Wright is, he's a really funny comedian. And I'm very highly influenced by several different comedians like Bill Burr or Patton Oswalt and Stephen Wright. Several different women comedians, especially on Twitter. If you ever read a comedian named Jenny Johnson, she's really funny. And I decided I wanted to do a variation on the story that Stephen Wright tells. And this is kind of weird, but it's funny. So, Cowboy and Indian, a variation on a theme by Stephen Wright. My affliction is peculiar, she said. How so, I asked. I met this beautiful woman in the manager's office at my apartment complex. She was a new resident. When she said that she was Austrian and Japanese, and wondered how this exotic combination could have ever occurred, I nerded out and delineated the respective histories of Japan and the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Later, she told me she was a dancer at a local strip club. Her affliction was she was a sex addict. I only want to have sex with Native American cowboys, she said. Well, that is interesting, I answered. Oh, by the way, my name is Bronco Large Tomahawk. Well, Lisa told me you guys were doing some stuff on revision, so I'm going to read. I've never read this in front of anybody before. In fact, it's not finished. You will never get somebody who, a writer to ever read something that is like not finished. But I decided to humble myself and do this. And I'll talk briefly after it just on the idea of revision. This is called A Thing of Beauty. Imani Wilson, do you know her? There's this man in a sports bar, eating a salad and drinking craft beer. He holds out his phone to the young blonde bartender. He repeats the question as she glances at the picture on the screen. Imani Wilson, he whispers, faintly, almost to himself. Do you know her? She shakes her head no. He turns toward me, a random stranger sitting on a stool next to him at a bar. He reaches out with his phone and starts to say, Imani Wilson, do you? I cut him off with a wave of my hand, not out of spite or anger, or even annoyance at being interrupted, as I try to drink a beer and watch the beautiful violence of combat sports on a television screen above me. I can scarcely believe I am in this moment. I can scarcely believe I am saying it as my lips part and the words are released out into this world. For so long I held them in. For so long I tried to forget. Yes, I know her, I say. I know Imani Wilson. Who is Imani Wilson? The last time I saw Imani Wilson, she was giving me a look of disdain, outright contempt. Imani Wilson walked out of my life forever and, wait, this isn't correct. This isn't Imani Wilson. I know this because I know her. I have loved her. I have been friends with her for so long. Imani Wilson is more than that. I know Imani Wilson. Imani Wilson is the most 100% perfect breakfast on a beautiful April morning. Imani Wilson is a part in a film that is so ludicrous and unintentionally hilarious that you rewind and laugh at it over and over again. This is Imani Wilson. She is unintentionally funny, unintentionally beautiful. This one time I wrote a poem for Imani Wilson. No, wait. Again, this is wrong. Imani Wilson once wrote a story about me, about what a character I am, my idiosyncrasies. This was a time when Imani Wilson and I would write long letters to each other. I would check the mail day after day, waiting for another correspondence, breathless, filled with anxiety. We were so young then, so unsure. I was embarrassed at my eccentric nature. When you're young, you feel both indestructible and insecure. You know nothing of mortality, but you know everything about your own superficial flaws. You fear nothing, but fear everything. Imani Wilson embraced the things that made me different. She reveled in them, loved them, wrote a story about them. Imani Wilson was the first person who let me know that it was okay for me to be me, that there was a beauty inside of me I never knew I ever had. I know Imani Wilson. I have a secret. I have never held Imani Wilson. Physically I have, but I have never really held her. Not like I could have. I've never let her know how much I love her. Wait, no, this is not true. She knows I love her. Everybody does. No, Imani Wilson doesn't even know that I simply like her. She doesn't know that she's not an ethereal creature to me, that I don't fantasize about her or dream of her. She doesn't know that the most gorgeous thing she has ever done was just be herself to me. Imani Wilson never had to be perfect. She could be vulnerable and human and beautiful all at the same time. Just like she taught me it was okay for me to be me. She also taught me that it was okay for her to be her. That this world isn't a fantasy. You don't have to imagine or create a fictional, beautiful world. Not when you have someone who is beautiful and real standing right in front of you. I know Imani Wilson. This one time, Imani Wilson climbed up a tree to save a cat. No, really, she did. This one isn't a mistake. This is exactly as I remember it. It was an elderly woman with a stray kitten, and it climbed up a tree. So Imani Wilson climbed after it. The kitten had a badly injured foot and was rabid. It clawed and bit Imani Wilson, but she finally got it down. Later, it had to be euthanized, and she cried inconsolably all night. Even later, she had to be taken to a hospital herself. Weeks later, maybe months, whatever the kitten was sick with had metastasized in her. She became almost deathly ill. In that time, a pall fell over her. Not from the physical impact of the disease. She handled that well, and antibiotics cleared her up in relatively short order. Her pain was different. I didn't have to ask to know what was hurting her. It was a kitten. She couldn't save him. The pain of her illness made her revisit the pain of losing him. When I see Imani Wilson, I see many things. I see hope. I see love. I see the most gorgeous black eyes I have ever been lost in. But I also see the pain. Imani Wilson made me realize that pain, hope, and love are all closely related to each other. That sometimes to have one, you have to have all three. That this isn't good or bad, that it's just the way things are. I know Imani Wilson. I want to love her. I want to forget her. I can do neither, and it is both beautiful and unbearable. You know Imani Wilson? He reaches out with his phone again. This time I take it and look down at the screen. Imani Wilson, he says. She is a thing of beauty. I am thinking about changing the person of it, so it may not be all I. And when I do that, I'll just kind of basically look what works better. But I do need to change the transitions from the part when the guy in the bar is like handing him the phone to look at it to when he begins to reflect on this character. And then especially the last part, because it's an awkward transition. So in doing that, I'm going to have to find out a way to make that more clear. And you can hear me like I had a trouble with the sentence or two, because it's still a little awkward in reading it. It's also, there's probably a little bit too many like unnecessary words in there. Like that. You'll hear that quite a bit when you do a first draft. So I'll probably cut a lot of those out, and I'll probably listen to this recording actually, and it'll give me a better idea of the cadence of it. Because whatever sounds awkward as I'm reading it, I would probably want to change. So I'll actually hear that, then adjust it accordingly. And for you to fully understand too how I wrote it, I mean it helps because if you've ever seen the movie The Usual Suspects, And you have a character who is sitting there and he's looking at things on a wall and he creates stories from it. I was actually in a sports bar and I was watching some mixed martial arts. And the bartender mentioned she went to like amphitheater high school or something. And the guy sitting there was like, oh, well, I know this girl, it might have been his daughter or somebody next door neighbor or something, but her name was Imani Wilson. He's like, do you know Imani Wilson? And I saw what, like he kept asking her that, showed her the picture, she didn't know who it was. And I thought, that's kind of an interesting starting point for a story. And I started taking notes as this was all going on. And a thing of beauty is actually, it's like a tagline for a poster for the beer Stella Artois. It's like Stella Artois is a thing of beauty. So I kind of took all of that and put it together into a story. And I've been told some of you probably read Murakami, the like most 100% like beautiful girl or whatever. I actually had breakfast with one of my friends, and she's a big Murakami fan. And we were joking that it was the most 100% perfect breakfast on a beautiful April morning. So I decided to use that in the story. And the unintentionally hilarious part that comes right there when he's talking about a part in a film that is so ludicrous and unintentionally hilarious. A friend of mine watched the movie Showgirls, and it's just god awful. It's like so bad, it's like funny. And there's this part that is it's just ridiculous. I don't even know if I can explain it. But it's like she works in a strip club, then she becomes like this like famous dancer. And like the old strip club people come to visit her. And like the guy was all pervy and stuff and she worked for him. And now they're almost like a mother-father couple to her when they come to visit her. And you're just like, oh, that guy was just creepy before, now he's acting like he's her dad. And my friend and I were watching this, and we were just laughing so hard at it. It's trying to be like serious and loving, but it's just like absolutely ridiculous. And that's why I kind of wrote that part, is the unintentionally hilarious thing. And I think women are fun when they're unintentionally hilarious. So I think everybody is, but I like the unintentional. I like unintentional beauty. The most beautiful people are always the ones who don't even realize how beautiful they are. And I guess I'll end with this one. And I wrote this many years ago, but I kind of like the structure of it, and it goes a lot of with what I was talking about earlier about breaking apart language and using one-liners. And I also use a lot of repetition. And this kind of does that, so I'll read this. And you actually might have heard this one before, so. This is called The Maze. This was a 1 year of my life when I said Bramer instead of Brahma. The time I was kicked in the chest by a bull, nearly killing me. My girlfriend stayed in her car while I lay prone in a rodeo arena outside of Cutbank, Montana, on the Blackfeet Indian Reservation. Furiously riding, integrating the world around her, transforming it magically from pen to paper. The paramedics frantically worked on me, trying to prevent cardiac arrest. I was awake the whole time, coherent, yet unable to move. They thought I was unconscious. One paramedic kneeled over me, preparing to deliver a jolt of electricity, rubbing the handles of a defibrillator together, about ready to yell clear. Did I win? I asked. The paramedic nearly fainted. No, someone out of sight said. One judge marked you and the other didn't. Another 1/10 of a second, I would have won the rodeo. Another 1/10 of a second, I would have rolled out from underneath that bowl. 2/10 away from health and glory. Life is not a matter of inches. It is a matter of instances, moments, seconds, 1/10 of seconds. What we do or do not do in life will be decided by painfully minuscule moments in time. A blink of an eye will determine success or failure. I was 1 second from being shocked to death, possibly about to enter cardiac arrest,
and all I cared about was if I made the ride or not. Meanwhile, my girlfriend was writing the essay of her life. Dust was swirling everywhere. The arena was freezing cold. I was loaded into an ambulance on a stretcher with what I would later find out was a bruised heart. She appeared out of nowhere, leaned over me and whispered, "I think this is the best thing I have ever written." My evening was spent in the emergency room. Shortly after my arrival, a bear attack victim was brought in from Glacier National Park. The doctor on call walked in, took one look at his two patients, then quipped dryly, "It looks like the Bulls and the Bears won tonight." I tell that joke now like it was funny at the time. You could tell the doctor enjoyed being humorous, the type of doctor who liked to keep patients in stitches, a real cut-up. Sometimes people who work in stressful careers have a morbid sense of humor. He dealt with illness all the time, trauma, death. He never saw someone who didn't have a complaint. His life was dealing with those in pain. A month later, he treated me again, this time for a dislocated shoulder. 3 months later, he was a medic who treated me for another dislocated shoulder and a torn knee ligament at a wrestling tournament. Never once did he stop cracking jokes. Never once did he tell me to do something different with my life. Guys like me keep people like him in business. Guys like me reiterate his jokes. Guys like me sport scars and jokes as if they were medals of honor. They become part of our own mythology, stories which are true, but not true, funny, yet not funny. Those moments when I was tough and legendary, except I was not. By then, my girlfriend was long gone. She left me for college and another life, one far from an Indian reservation, where she could write and be intellectually stimulated by men with life prospects and no broken bones. But that night she paced the emergency waiting room, scribbling notes, finishing her essay. She paused only to step outside, smoking cigarettes while talking to the others, waiting for their loved ones, interviewing them, scorching each detail to memory, putting them down on paper. The nature of my injuries required spending the night in a hospital for observation without painkillers. I was sleepless, agitated, hurting. Sometime in the early morning hours, she came to me. "Read this." Her flat eyes held all the emotion of a bull, or was that a bear? She wrote about hospitals, visiting emergency room time after time after time. Every rodeo I was injured at, every wrestling tournament, all the memories she had, that we had. She wondered what was wrong with me. Why would I keep doing this to myself, sacrificing my body? She salvaged it all, our life together up to that point. It was the most amazing work I have ever read. I never slept more beautifully. This one time, we went to a maze right outside of Kalispell, Montana, on the road back to the Blackfeet Indian Reservation. We had been in Missoula, listening to one of her favorite poets read at the University of Montana. I could not understand any of it. I was a bull rider, an athlete, a dumb farm hick. If I could not fight, wrestle, or ride it, it was beyond my comprehension. But I loved her from the first second I saw her, working for the summer at Glacier National Park. I would do anything for her. It didn't matter if I felt out of place or not. We stopped at this maze. It was wooden and three-dimensional. I had been in it once with my brothers when we were children. It seemed tiny now, stuffed with people. We held hands throughout. It was scary. Dark from the dwindling evening light, I kept saying the same thing over and over and over. Go right, go right, go right. Every turn was worse. The crowd thickened. I felt like a platelet in a blocked artery, barely able to move, holding on to her hand as long as possible. Then with instant relief, the people surged forward. The path ahead opened in a rush. We were separated. Go right, go right, raced through my mind. I was out of the maze, turning, smiling, ready to hug and kiss the woman who was a few steps behind me. She was not there. I waited outside the maze. Each person coming out was her for an instant. My memory fell back to my pre-driving years, waiting for one of my friends to drive out to our farm in the country to pick me up so we could go to town. Every car coming down a dirt road near our house seemed as if it could be a friend. In those times, each car's lights become distinct. Oh yeah, Bubba's pickup has one headlight like that. Momentary jubilation. Then a vehicle would pass. I would nearly die from the disappointment each time. I waited for her. Every person was her, then not. I could feel my heart bruise again, sinking. The kid working at the maze would not let me go back in to search for her. I was about to pay and enter through the front of the maze again, when finally she walked out. I always felt sauntered was a better description of how she moved. This was the second time I saw those flat eyes. The third was a short time later, when she sauntered out of my life forever with no explanation. This story is not true. However, like anything I write, there is truth in it. What I did was weave different instances in my life together, creating a fictional story. This style, including the revelation I am making now, comes from an Amy Hempel short story titled The Harvest. For example, I did once wrestle and ride bulls. I also had many injuries because of these activities. One of them occurred at a high school rodeo outside of Cutbank, Montana, where I was kicked in the chest by a bull which bruised my heart and also a lung. The part about the funny doctor and the bear attack victim was accurate. I had no girlfriend at the time, though. I also was barely spared the indignity of a defibrillator when I asked a paramedic if I had one. Again, one judge marked me and one did not. The girl with the essay has some truth to it as well. She was in one of my writing classes. She wrote two of the most beautiful essays I have ever read. One was called Salvage and was about memories. And the other, she wrote about taking her sick roommate to an emergency room. And maybe a part of me did love her a little from the first time I saw her. But we never had a romantic relationship. As for her flat eyes, I only saw those once, right before she sauntered out of my life forever with no explanation. Then there's a passage asserting life as a matter of instances. I mention this because if I would have taken the time to stop her, perhaps things could have ended up differently. However, I let her go. In a matter of a few seconds, I blew it. My failure may have been decided by those few moments. This is something I will never know. As for the maze, I had a dream about navigating it with her, precisely as described in the story. I have been in it as a child in real life, too. In my dream, we were not coming from a poetry reading. We were giving separate readings of our own work at a fairground next to where the maze was located. This fairground is non-existent in reality. In my dream, the actress Kirsten Dunst attended my reading with a group of anonymous locals. After the maze incident, I allowed the girl to cool down. Then I went to eat fry bread with my new friend, Kirsten Dunst. Including this in my story would defy all reality, so there was no need for it. The one aspect which hit home with me was correlating my bruised heart injury to the pain of standing outside the maze waiting for her. Every single day since she walked away, I have felt like I did outside that maze in my dream, wishing to hear from her, to run into her, to read her beautiful words somewhere, in a newspaper, magazine, a novel. I would do anything to know her again, but all I can do is wait. I am forever outside that maze, counting seconds, instances, preparing to seize those next precious moments. As soon as I see her, I'll say all those things I never said as I watched her walk away. I will not waste another tenth of a second. I will not allow myself another bruised heart. You know, nowadays, bull runners wear protective vests. When I rode, they were not required. This has reduced the number of serious injuries significantly. If I had worn one that day, I may have never been hurt at all. Probably would have only had the wind knocked out of me for a short time. However, I suspect the bears are still easily winning their battles with hikers in Glacier National Park. Well, that's it. Whenever I read that story, I'm reminded that if you see, I have this like scar like back here. I was actually in that incident, I was hooked in the back of the head, and that's what made me go under the bowl. So like every time I get a haircut, I see this thing. I'm like, God damn it. And I always mess with people too. They'll cut my hair. They'll be like, oh, sorry. I'll be like, oh, you slipped and cut that.
So I think we have some time for questions. But my question to everyone in class is, do you guys have questions right now, Mike, or do you want to take a minute to kind of look at your notes and put together, think about what you want to ask? What would you guys rather do? We could set a timer, do like a minute to write down, you know, what am I thinking? What are my questions? Or we can just jump in. Stephen, what do you think? No pressure.
Oh yeah, okay. Just give them 1 minute, I think.
A
Give them
minute.
1 minute.
Yeah, so wait, who's my timer? Who did the timer the other day? Can you do it? Do you have it? Can you do it? So we'll do a timer, 1 minute. So quick. So you got a minute, and when the buzzer goes off, like I said, no pressure, but any questions of it. Bill's he's open-minded, as you can hopefully tell. As am I, this is over. All right, you ready?
Concept of the casual friends one I really like. I do have one that I didn't read called Shop Talk, which is a departure for me, and how I usually typically I'll just go through and I always wrote really strictly, like every line I would, like it'd take me forever to even write a paragraph. But that one, I did the Hicks and Gracie thing. I flowed with the go, basically. I just wrote something out, and I conferred with one of my friends on it, and I gave him a lot of leeway in that he offered advice on it, and I just kind of allowed it to find itself, and it ended up it got published in the American Indian Culture and Research Journal, and that probably ended up being one of my very favorite things that I've written. So I would say those two. And then maybe my first published short story, which I am quite a bit beyond now in terms of ability and everything. I didn't know how to write shit then. I just knew how to tell a funny story basically. And it was like this horrid, goofy story about one of my friends we called Blue Duck. And he's just a crazy guy. And I was drinking with him one time, and he like was shooting holes in his roof in his house, and like a couple of my other friends, we all did like all these wild things, which I'd advise you never to do. But one of my friends, we'd always go eat nachos at Town Pump in Montana, like at after we were done drinking at the end of the night. So I started with the premise of being left at Town Pump in Cutbank, Montana, and eating nachos with my friend. And one of the nachos, I went to my friend's house afterwards, and I'm eating nachos, and I was like, why is this corn chip blue? And his sister's like, you know, Bill, if you're so drunk you're seeing blue chips, just go to sleep. So I went to sleep, and the next day I woke up, and they were actually one of the multicolored ones. It was like kind of a blue-looking chip. And I was like, I was fucking right, you know? But I think I kind of put together a whole story based on like blue nachos and my friend Blue Duck, and it's just a mess of a goofy story, but it was my first published short story, and it's really funny, and it has no real writing technique to it at all, but that was my first one, so I'm kind of proud of that one too. I would never use it for anything now, but yeah, just the idea that I realized, you know, this can happen, I can get stuff published, and maybe I can go somewhere with this, and after many years of toiling, I still have nothing, but I have a lot of publications, so I'm good with that.
My question was, like, you hit that love subject a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Like, did it come, like, do you have background in it, or just made up? Like,
I think everybody probably has a background in love, but I mean,
but,
I just, I was a big fan of Gabriel Garcia Marquez, and he writes a lot about love. Love in the Time of Cholera is one of my favorite books. One of my favorite short stories is Sleeping Beauty in the Airplane by Marquez. And I think over the years, I just kind of embraced the idea that you know, a lot of people shy away from it, because writing about love is often kind of trite. Like, a lot of people just they want to do other things artistically, and I don't know. I think we all kind of have our own stories to tell, and that if you can touch on something a little bit different, it's like Patton Oswalt, the comedian, said that a really great comedian will write a joke or come up with a bit on the same subject that everybody else is doing, but they hit that little twist to it that helps you discover something new about it. So if you're good at it, you can, and I don't know how good I'm at it, but I like to think that maybe I can hit a twist to it where you're coming up with something new, that it resonates with people in a slightly different way. And that's just kind of how it evolved for me, really. That, and I just love women, so.
So when you're going to write, like, what do you do when you write? What's your usual pattern? Like, you just sit down and like just start writing, or like do you have like a drink with you? Do you like do like a ritual or something like that?
Well, I used to just do it when I was inspired, but now you have to treat it like a job, and I'm still not as good at that, because I'll start it and I'll be like, oh, I'm gonna watch TV for a while or something. But I used to listen to classical music as I did it, but now I've gotten to where I like to have a movie on in the background. So, and I did go to video school, so I am a film buff, and I own like 300 DVDs or something. So I'll just grab something that I feel won't distract me, but will be good background noise, and I put that on. I think I still do it kind of, but I do it in a different way. I had a teacher when I was in video school. He was an audio engineer. He said that he would carry a notepad with him, and he'd write stuff down all the time, like just ideas. And for me, I actually carry my little recorder with me. And if I hear something, every now and then I'll give a note to self. This is this happened today, and maybe I can write a story about it. But often my process now is I just have all these ideas, and I'll sit down in the morning and I'll figure out, okay, what am I going to do today? I'm going to try to get like maybe 200 words out today. That's not much, but it's at least something, you know. And with regards to my comedy, which is what I mostly write on Twitter, basically, and I do have some other things. That is, I'll just think of something really stupid, and I'll be like, okay, I'm gonna put it down. And even if it is kind of dumb, I mean, at least you're putting things together. And at some point, you're gonna find some way to use it, or you're gonna find something that it might work. Or I'll write things down and then put it on Twitter, and then I might revisit it later, and I'll be like, okay, I can actually use that line in a story, or something like that. It's a weird kind of, I don't have one process, I'd say, but it's just a matter of, okay, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to do something today. And I think the most successful writers who are really good at that. I mean, we were just talking, like, one of my friends and I were talking about how, like, Hemingway and all of those old school guys, or even like somebody like Jim Harrison, they're functioning alcoholics, basically. Like, they would go out and like just party and do all this crazy stuff, but at 6, 7 in the morning the next day they would be up and they would work till like 4 in the afternoon, and then they'd maybe go out and drink more again or whatever, but at least they would do it. And that's really the main thing. If you're serious about it, you're gonna wanna do that. Outside of that, if you really just want to write just for fun or whatever, find something comfortable for you. I know a great poet who stands when he writes. I can't do that, but he'll literally stand like this, and he writes all his poems as he's standing. He's just comfortable doing that. I'm comfortable listening to movies. Some people listen to music. Other people have to have everything absolutely quiet and locked away in their room and everything. It's weird. You'll find a lot of writers are kind of odd, and part of it is their business is to read and to write, and you're often alone all the time. So it kind of attracts people who like maybe have anxiety or things like that. So you'll always see, like, in any group, like if there's a function or something, you'll see like everybody will be mingling around, and there'll be like a core of like the 4 weird writer types, like all hanging in the corner. So, I mean, really, it's just you got to be a little bit isolated, and just whatever you find comfortable. There's no real one way to do that either.